Hey guys, I am Kristen Howerton and I blog at Rage Against the Minivan.
And I'm Paul Martin. I blog at Paulosophia.
So Paul and I are old friends. We have one thing in common, which is that we're political junkies, but we come from opposite sides of the aisle. I am a socialist Democrat.
And I am a moderate Republican wondering why this isn't showing
Wondering
up.
why you're still...
Oh, there it is.
Wondering why you're still a Republican?
No, I'm not. I'm just trying to figure out how to link this thing. But, there we go. I'm going to do it right now. No, I'm a total moderate, and I'm having technical difficulties finding this thing.
There it is.
But when I go there... Sorry, guys. We will figure this out closely.
Look.
She has to do my Facebook stuff.
Opposite sides of the aisle.
Oh my gosh. You embarrassed me.
Shared.
Thank you.
Okay. Chad's asking where he can buy my dress because I do a lot of Facebook Live videos about my dresses. And you can go ahead and make fun of me. I don't care. This dress is from Target. And I will affiliate link it underneath.
And this shirt, my V-neck, my classic V-neck, is from Costco because I have shopped at Nordstrom and everywhere else, and Costco has the best V-necks. So maybe I'll get to do an ad for the first time ever.
You should.
They'll pay me like a penny.
There you go. I mean, I get paid tens of dollars every month for sharing the dresses that I wear. All right, so I know, yay for Target and Costco. That's the mark of busy parents who shop for clothing while they're buying things for their families.
Absolutely.
Right? That's all I have time for. Target and Amazon. Okay, so Paul and I disagree politically, philosophically. However, we find ourselves in agreement more often than not in the current administration, and we want to talk about that today. Before we dive in, we are testing. We have a big microphone here, and we are and we're seated at the table, and we are testing out our audio to hopefully launch this as a podcast in the coming month. So if you are not accustomed to watching videos, which is sort of preaching to the choir since you're watching a video right now, but if you would prefer to listen to our conversations on podcasts, stay tuned, and we'll be sharing that shortly. We'll continue to do and record Facebook Live, but then it'll also go to a podcast if you would prefer. Yeah,
and we'd like to just allow more people. It's just so much easier with a podcast sometimes to get in the car and listen to these things. And so the spirit of it will be the same, which will be very conversational, very loose. We don't want to be technical or too heady, but it'll just be easier for some people to watch. And we need a name still.
We need a name. If you're good at naming things, we're
going to have a contest. If you can come up with our name, Kristen is going to offer you a brand new Macintosh.
I don't even know where you're going there. Macintosh? You know I'm like Adele.
Okay, she's going to offer you Adele. What's Adele?
I'm not going to give you my computer.
It's so weird to use Adele.
I know.
What's Adele? What's Adele without?
I'm Democrat, you're Republican, and you're a Mac guy, and I'm a PC, so...
Oh, chat's in the audio is perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, so we will dive right into the political brouhaha of the day, which is this Russia business. And we now find... Okay, so backing up, explain to folks at home and me the significance of Comey having been fired at this time.
Yeah, and... This thing is really a riddle for most.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and for most people, and I don't mean to sound like say this in a heady way, but the thing is kind of complicated. There are a lot of spokes to it.
It is.
But the bottom line.
That's why I'm asking you to explain it. Yeah. To me, I mean them. Explain it for them.
Yeah, no, I mean the bottom line is that the Russians didn't like Hillary. Mm-hmm. Hillary was super tough, as was Barack Obama, and so the Russians decided. A way to rule the world is to influence elections.
Right.
And so they broke in. They hacked into the Democratic National Committee's emails, and they released these things, and Trump ends up winning. Mm-hmm. But now, where we're at now is a lot of people think that the Trump campaign was part of that, that they literally aligned themselves with Russia And this investigation, like 3 or 4 months ago, people were saying, oh, it's nothing. This is nothing. Well, the thing won't go away.
Well, it won't go away. And then, you know, when you have the head of the FBI who's running the investigation being fired, that's telling.
It's telling. And what happened like 3 or 4 weeks ago is Comey, the head of the FBI, was... he went before one of the committees, I think, the House, and they asked him some questions, and he basically said, yeah, we're investigating a bunch of stuff, including possibly collusion, which is a technical word for, like, working together with the White House. And as soon as Comey said that, I think that was the end, because we now have learned very recently that Trump tried to get Comey to drop this thing, and that's obstruction of justice.
It is obstruction of justice.
The definition of that. Nixon's first impeachment article was for trying to obstruct an investigation. And
well, and now it's like news is coming out that Trump was not shared some secrets that he shouldn't have in terms of intel with Russia that were classified. And the irony is that's really what lost Hillary the election. And that was the big beef that most Republicans had with Hillary, the emails. And now we're watching the man they elected show much less discretion in national security.
And as a Republican, and as somebody who has a long history of voting for Republicans, and I wrote in John Kasich, who I saw with Bernie Sanders this week in a debate, and it was one of the most beautiful. Like, you have to watch this thing, Kristen.
I know, I need to.
You have Bernie, who's a socialist. You have John
Bernie.
Kasich, who is a good...
Kasich's a reasonable person, and I would not be scared to have him as president.
And it reminded me a little bit of us, because they were basically saying we have fundamental differences, but they were almost completing each other's sentences because they are both decent men that they love their country, they are fair, they are just, and anyway, another part of this, and we made some notes, is... You know, there's a lot... Trump never released his tax returns.
Right.
And every president since Nixon has released his tax returns. Hillary released 40 years of tax returns, you know, and Trump wouldn't. And so there's suspicion that Trump has done business with Russia, like big-time deals with Russia. And so I pulled this quote today, and this is at a deposition... in 2007, Donald Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., said, Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets. And then he says, we see a lot of money pouring in from Russia. This is what Trump Jr. said. And he later said, Russia is just a different world. It's a question of who knows who, whose brother is paying off who. So there's absolutely no question that the Trump organization has had financial ties, deep financial ties with Russia. And this is just wacky.
Here's what's crazy about this, too. You know, because I'm trying to think to myself, like, okay, conspiracy theory, what does Trump have to gain with his ties to Putin? What does he have to gain? And it's like, is it political gain? Is it world domination? And what's so sad is I actually think it's just personal wealth. It doesn't have anything to do with his politics, with his philosophy, with, you know, some kind of a administration that he wants to usher forward, or a political stance. It's literally for personal wealth gain. Which is absurd that we have one man wagging the dog of our entire country because it's going to benefit him financially. It's crazy.
Right. And there was this, I think it was 60 Minutes a month or two ago, and I watched it, and I had no idea of any of this, but apparently, I think it was 60 Minutes, Putin is said to be the richest man in the world, but the way that he has divested his assets is such that we would never know. But maybe it was Time Magazine, but right now, like, the word on the street in certain circles is that Vladimir Putin is the richest man in the world. And much of what Trump might be doing is regarding finances, which is just, it's one thing that we have an oligarchy in this country pretty much already with the 1% of the 1%
Right.
having 90% of the wealth
Right.
in this country, which I agree with Bernie Sanders, and I think that's repulsive and disgusting. But to think that we're now possibly shaking hands with a foreign adversary so that the Trump empire could become bigger. And again, none of this is proven, but there is some writing on the wall.
There certainly is. And what is so absurd to me, too, is that this is a man who was voted in by many working class people under the promise of draining the swamp of this kind of, wealth management, personal gain. And that is the opposite of who he is as a person. Okay, so here's a burning question I have about this whole thing. If this all goes down and we find out that, Trump has influenced the election through his ties with Russia and impeachment is likely imminent, what happens to Pence? Is he complicit in this? Because it kind of seems like he is too. Does he get wiped out also, or do we have a Pence presidency in our future?
It's a great question, and I follow people on the left and the right on Twitter, and I get automatic updates all day long. And many on the left are saying that there is absolutely no possible way that Pence is not going to be implicated. And the reason why is Pence was in charge of the transition.
Correct.
So Pence would have been the one working with Michael Flynn. Pence would have been the one working with all of these people. And so many on the far left, and I get these Twitter feeds all day long, are saying, good luck to those of you on the far right that think he's the evangelical, God-loving, conservative, family-oriented guy. He was the man at the center of the entire transition.
Right.
And that's what's interesting to me. I think,
so he's got blood on his hands.
He's apparently has blood on his hands, although he has obviously a much better reputation than Trump, and frankly, as a Republican, even though I'm not a huge Pence fan, I would at least go to bed at night feeling somewhat safe if Mike Pence was the president.
Well, I see Mike Pence as someone who wants to forward a political agenda, which is different than Trump. I think he wants to forward a conservative political agenda,
especially socially.
Especially socially. I mean, he's the anti-abortion, conservative, socially, and so it's really different because I think Trump is just about himself, literally just about himself. But I think that Pence has seen Trump as this sort of marionette that he has to, kind of manage in order to push his own agenda. Yeah. And that's what, if Pence goes down too, I think that's what he gets for aligning himself with someone like that.
Right.
Because, I don't know.
And here's the deal. To me, here's the biggest deal. Whether you're Republican, like myself, whether you're Democratic, socialist, like Kristen, and this is what is intriguing to me. We are talking about a foreign power, Russia of all foreign powers, not like England or Germany.
Russia. The Russia that I grew up going to bed at night scared they were going to bomb us.
Right.
Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are not friendly folks, right? No. Putin was the head of the KGB. He was responsible for countless deaths. We're talking whether you're left or right, and this is the part where
he's a maniacal tyrannist.
He is, and this issue is not an issue of a party.
It's not.
It's not. This is 17 intelligence agencies that are comprised of Republicans and Democrats, civil servants who have given their lives to our justice system, and the CIA, the FBI, and all these other agencies have proven as a matter of empirical fact that Russia hacked our system. Mm-hmm. They tried to influence the United States of America's elections, and that is somehow being sideswiped for political reasons, to me, is baffling. I don't care if you're left or right, that ain't good.
I completely agree, and I feel like if people take nothing else away from our conversation today, I want to say, what the hell is happening with Republicans not being outraged? Everyone should be outraged. If we had Russia influence we are the United States of America. If we had Russia influence our democratic process, which is what we hold so dear, all of us, Democrat, Republican, we all hold that dear. If that happened, Republicans should be flipping tables right now. And the silence from so many of them, I think, is so telling of what is so problematic in our country, which is party allegiance over reason, over integrity, party allegiance over everything.
Yeah, but I think it does come down to power. I mean, I think if you're the, you're a representative of some section of Alabama, and ultimately you kind of dig the perks of being a representative, and you get to go to Congress, and you have this nice expense account,
right?
And ultimately your constituency all watch Fox News.
Yes.
And so ultimately, if your constituency is still for Trump, it's very hard to be this kind of radical cavalier idealist. And I disagree with it.
You're talking about politicians, and I agree. They have to kind of toe the party line. But I mean our citizens. I mean my Republican Facebook friends who are really quiet right now.
They're so quiet.
So quiet.
It's so quiet.
And that's the problem is, when you talk about the politicians, they are speaking to their constituents, and the Republican constituents are not loud. If they were loud, if there was an uproar from Republican constituents, these politicians would be falling in line.
Yeah.
But everyone's quiet.
Yeah, they screwed up. And I mean, like Paul Ryan and John McCain's been better, I think, than many. Kasich was amazing the other night with Bernie. I mean, guys, go Google Kasich. If you're going to do anything, go Google that conversation. It is worth, if you are discouraged and skeptical and cynical about our country, I am telling you, watch the 42 minutes of those two men talking. It is absolutely one of the most rivetingly encouraging conversations between a radical socialist Democrat that shares many of your ideologies and this evangelical kind of Christian, happy-go-lucky Republican, and they were almost finishing each other's sentences because ultimately they're decent people.
But they're reasonable.
And they're reasonable. To your point, last night on CNN, a commentator was saying that this issue right now with Comey and with Mueller and with this whole investigation won't matter because about 40% of the country, less than 40%, of Trump supporters only listen to Fox News. They only look at Breitbart News. And that they aren't even going to know that any of this is happening. And today, as a discipline, as a spiritual discipline, I went to Fox News' website, I went to Breitbart's website, and it was astounding. Because what's happening right now, in many ways, is bigger than Watergate. Watergate was about some random break-in. This is about a foreign country interfering with our election.
Right.
And we have news agencies. By the way, Roger Ailes died today, which is the head of Fox, which is crazy. And he was a thug. I hate to say it, but anyway, God bless him.
On graves,
yeah, but the amount of women that he abused is repulsive. But anyway, the theory many people think is that Trump's supporters, knowing that they don't watch regular news, even PBS or anything else, that they're not going to hear too much about this because Fox and Breitbart and these other right-wing news agencies aren't even talking about it. And that's wacky.
Yeah, it is wacky. All of this was, last night, the night before on Twitter was just, a brouhaha. And then Fox News was covering just something inconsequential.
They talked about it on CNN. I watch CNN.
I do
and
too.
One of the reasons I watch CNN is because they always have, they slant left, but they will always have Trump's ardent mouthpieces they're debating. Always.
They always have
They're
both sides.
always on both sides.
They do.
And those are my favorite parts where they have the panel. And the panel will be, people on the left and the right. I'll switch to Fox sometimes. But in any case, this thing is just, it's so much bigger. Even David Gergen is one of my heroes. He's worked for 5 presidents. He worked for Nixon.
I really like him too.
Right. He's like the papa.
Yes.
And he is so measured.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no way he's going to be thought of as being right or left because he's worked for Clinton and he's worked for...
But he's worked for all sides.
All sides, yeah. And he's, he's the Harvard kind of dawn of politics. And he's saying, we have entered the territory of impeachment.
For sure.
And this is a guy that does not exaggerate.
He doesn't. This is why we're friends, because we both know who David Gergen is.
Yeah, of course I knew you would.
So nerdy. Okay, let's do a slightly deeper dive into some of the specifics around why this is such a big deal. So let's talk about Flynn being fired by Trump and how this all connects and relates.
Yeah, so, this guy Michael Flynn was fired by Obama. He was thought to be a loose cannon. Mm-hmm. He wasn't very respected, but he was a general. And it seems to be the case that Flynn was probably the person that Trump used to pull off some of these deals. But, the chronology is that Flynn was fired by Trump.
Right.
Obama warned Trump in November. President Obama just said, "Don't touch Flynn. This isn't partisan, but this guy is not going to work out for you. Trust me.
Yeah.
He's not going to work out for you."
And he was under investigation.
He was under investigation.
Which they knew.
Which they knew. He had done this deal with Turkey where he got like $500,000 for some consulting or whatever it was.
So was Flynn basically a patsy in this whole scheme? It was just used and discarded?
What people think is that Flynn was so loyal to Trump, and in the earliest days, Flynn would go speak for Trump, and he would cite the lock her up banter amongst these crowds, and that since Trump so loves loyalty, he pledged this radical allegiance to Michael Flynn, and later on has to basically fire the guy. But then you get Jeff Sessions.
Then you've got Jeff Sessions, who had to recuse himself based on his dealings. I mean, it is so absurd. Like, this is going to be an amazing movie in
it's an amazing
4
movie.
years. It's insane.
And
what is happening?
What makes me crazy is the audacity of anyone to think that this is because of the left or this is because of the media.
Right.
This is one of the most extravagant, intricate scandals we've seen in our country.
It's all scandalous.
Ever. And this is not because I'm some lefty. I'm a right.
I
vote for Republicans.
Right.
I want my Republicans to kick ass.
Scandalized.
Right. But it's messy. So Jeff Sessions, who's the head of the he's the attorney general. Right. He had to recuse himself. He had to basically say, I was so involved that I can't do it.
Right.
And then this Robenstein guy. Oh, and this is the amazing thing that happened yesterday, because Trump thinks I'm going to fire Comey.
Right.
Comey isn't falling in line with me.
Right. So bye, and I don't have to deal with him anymore.
So he fires Comey. That was last week or whatever, 2 weeks ago. The whole country is going crazy. Trump thinks that he's going to be able to appoint some crony.
Right.
And Robenstein, and I know this gets really complicated, but you have the Attorney General, who's the head of the whole justice system, Sessions. He had to say, I can't be part of this because I was part of the Trump campaign. So the deputy, Rosenstein, becomes the head guy. And Rosenstein yesterday, just kind of out of the blue, they gave Trump 30 minutes notice. And they just called Trump and said, hey, dude, Robert Mueller is taking this sucker over. And Mueller, on the left and on the right, this guy, if you don't believe in American civil servants, just Google Robert Mueller. Yeah. He is respected by the most crazy left-wing
nuts. I feel like Robert Mueller is Dad just showed up.
Yeah, Dad showed up.
The kids have been fighting, the kids are on the couch beating the crap out of each other, and Dad just walked in, and Dad's like, no. That's Robert Mueller. But yeah. I mean, so we've got special counsel assigned.
Special counsel assigned. You have the House investigating it still. You have the Senate investigating it still. Trump has become very timid. If you just watch the last week or so, they're kind of hunkered down.
He's still tweeting idiotic things.
Yeah, he shot back today. But there are so many weird things happening. Trump has spoken negatively about everybody.
Yeah.
Democrats, Republicans, Germans, French, Chinese, Mexicans. He will not utter a negative word about Russia.
No.
Why? There's just something there.
Yeah.
I'm with you, Republicans. I'm with you.
There's obviously some kind of an allegiance there and some kind of a backdoor deal, for sure, that is putting our country at risk. Yeah. So
we have in our notes just how does this apply to religion in America? And one of the things we want to do in our podcast is not make it about faith, but being that 80 or 90% of the people in our country are people of faith, whether they're Muslims or Jews or Christians, and it affects their voting. I wrote some notes about just the link of the evangelical right.
Yeah.
81% of them voted for Donald Trump. 81%.
Yeah.
Of our people, so to speak, voted for Donald Trump. It's weird to me.
It's super weird. It doesn't make any sense. This is a guy who clearly has no integrity whatsoever. And I think Christians voted for him because they think that he's going to appoint a pro-life seat. And he might, but our country might go on flames before that happens.
Right.
And this is the problem, Christians, with voting over a single social issue. Yeah. Because you've got to look at the bigger picture. I mean, we're screwed. Unless, and hopefully he's impeached, but if not, I think we're screwed. So maybe you're going to get your appointment that you wanted, but
yeah, and just the fact, just the writing that was on the wall with Trump's ethics.
Yeah.
I mean, bankruptcies, sex scandals. I mean, guys, look. I believe in redemption. I believe in trust me, I have my own faults, and they're not pretty. But when you're talking about the most powerful person in the country, you want a basic
level of integrity.
A basic level of integrity. And so this is not some kind of lofty judgment of a man who's a baby Christian trying to figure it out. That's all good and well, but we are here talking about somebody who had decades of scandals, bankruptcies, having to settle with people that he had ripped off. Like, what else did we expect?
What's funny, too, is I think back to, remember when, the Monica Lewinsky scandal happened, and people were calling for the impeachment of Clinton. And I was in college at the time, and I was at a Christian college, and I remember my parents and, my Christian professors saying, well, we hold, someone in leadership of our country to a high moral standard, and they must be held to a high moral standard. So even if him getting a blowjob by Monica Lewinsky doesn't really have any effect on the country, we must be outraged. We must call for impeachment because of the moral failure. And it's so interesting to me, these same people that have completely changed their tune on Trump, where we're like, well, his moral stuff is over here. We're going to compartmentalize. And, he's going to be a great leader, but maybe he's like kind of crazy in his personal life, but that's okay. It's like changing morality based on your political, and that, I mean, we've talked about this ad nauseum, but really that is where I think nationalism is above religion for so many people. When you change your morality based on what works to get your guy into office, then you are a Republican above being a Christian.
And this is something that we deeply want to explore on this podcast.
Yeah.
Because there is something happening in this country where at one point it was the moral majority. Mm-hmm. The Christians were the ones that held to the higher standards with respect to sex, with respect to philandering, with respect to all these kinds of sins. And now it seems like it's flip-flopped. And I'm not quite sure exactly what's going on. But if you compare Clinton's sexual life to Trump's sexual life, I'm sorry, but it's a wash, and I'm giving Trump the benefit of the doubt on that one. Just look at some of the things we have on recordings of him. And so this whole thing of the evangelical church and religion in America is interesting to me. And I pulled this from an article yesterday from the New Republic. And it's at one point Trump said his favorite Bible verse was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Do with that what you want.
Everybody loves that. I'm going to get that tattooed right here.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. Like, all of my Christian friends are just so into this idea, this Old Testament idea
on a pillow.
Of we're going to just... Anyway, but what it reads, Trump talked about something and he said 2 Corinthians, right? And if you live in London or England, that's fine. But if you live in America, you've never read the Bible.
If you've gone to church ever,
right?
You know it's 2 Corinthians.
It's 2 Corinthians. So, and this says, I like this. It says, as it turned out, Trump's biblical mishap didn't matter to the evangelicals.
Mm-hmm.
He just, it's like saying the book of Job or something. I don't know, the book of Psalms. It's just, you don't do that if you've gone to church. He won South Carolina handily and went on to capture 81% of the white evangelical vote in November, beating the previous high of 78% of George W. Bush. Let me say this again. Donald Trump got 81% of the evangelical vote. George W. Bush, say what you want about the dude. He's a decent man. He's a decent husband. He loves God. He gave up alcohol at 40 years old. As skewed as he might have been on Iraq or whatever you want to say, I'd like to hang out with the guy, and I'd trust him with my kids.
Yeah.
He got only 78%. By comparison, Reagan won only 67% of the evangelicals, and Jimmy Carter, who is the most radical Christian president we've had in the last 100 years, as far as I'm concerned, a Southern Baptist whose candidacy marked, for many secular observers, the emergence of evangelicalism as a political force, won less than even Reagan. The outcome called into question plenty of assumptions. And so the question is, how could the so-called Christian right, believed to vote according to a fiercely moral agenda, embrace the most impious presidential candidate in American history? And that's the thing that keeps me up at night sometimes.
And I think you know part of the answer, and I think I do too, and it's xenophobia. It's, I think that Trump has promised white people that this sort of browning of America will be set to rest under him. And I think we are at a crossroads with a lot of older people, white people, who are really scared of the diversity, that is emerging in the U.S., and Trump was an antidote for that. I think that's what it is.
And we like to talk about race, and there's...
Well,
we were going
should
to
we
talk
dive
about,
into that?
Sure. We've been going on for a while, but we can do it. I want to just say, before we go there, the Wall Street Journal, which is one of the more right-wing publications out there, I think it's owned by Murdoch, said that, quote, and this is a conservative news source, presidencies can withstand only so much turbulence before they come apart. And the Journal warned that Trump was on the verge of betraying his supporters, and they said, as his presidency sinks before his eyes. This is a right-wing newspaper. This White House is in complete tailspin. It's not because I'm some leftist. It's a reality that we all have to inform ourselves about and deal with.
It's going to be really interesting to watch over the next few months. I mean, do you think impeachment is imminent?
It's so hard to know. It's so hard to know.
It is, because I've been really surprised this year, but I don't see how.
3 weeks ago, people were saying impeachment. Come on, you kook. But then you have people like David Gergen saying he fired the FBI director. He told the FBI director, hey, will you lay off?
But he's basically fired anyone who doesn't agree with him. And I mean, the whole press thing, I don't know. There's a lot of plausible deniability in what he does. So the press thing, but firing the director of the FBI while under investigation.
And we've been saying this because this is maybe our 20th or 30th episode, but early on we were saying that Trump, unfortunately, knows the CEO world very well, but we have balance of powers.
Right.
So yesterday, we have the former head of the FBI who's now over Trump. Yeah.
And, Trump is having toddler temper tantrums over the balance of power. He hates it. I remember when he tweeted, I'll see you in court, to the judicial court. He does not know what to do with himself because he can't boss everyone around.
And that's the thing, my dad is an entrepreneur. He's never worked for a person in his life since he was 16. And he reminds me of Trump in that he's super smart, he's well-rounded, he's done really well in his life. But if he had to be accountable,
right?
If my father had to be accountable, good luck. Because he's only, he's 78 years old.
Right.
For decades, all he knows is I'm the boss,
right.
do what I say,
right.
or get the hell out.
Right, and that is what we're seeing with Trump, for sure.
Right, but you can't say get the hell out to the other
the Senate
powers.
And the House.
The Senate, the House, and the
judiciary.
Yeah, right. We have balance of powers, and it's got to be tough.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about Terrence Crutcher and the lack of indictment. So Terrence Crutcher, if you're not familiar, he was an unarmed black man shot by a white police officer. There was video released of the situation. He was walking with his hands up. It was, there are many situations of unarmed black men where, I think a lot of people will point to this or that, this misstep that they made where it was ultimately their fault. This is certainly one of those situations, and I know you've said this before too, where he didn't do anything wrong. And he was shot fatally, and this police officer has not been held accountable.
Yeah.
What the hell?
And I think to many of you, this is one of those issues that isn't, I don't want to say it's not important, but it seems fringy.
I agree.
Like
if you don't have a black son.
Yeah, like I can't imagine how you feel. And I can't pretend to imagine how you have real fear.
Yeah.
It's real fear. But I think last time we recorded, I defended the cops. And I said that many times they have to be in these situations where they're scared. Like literally they have somebody and they have their gun out and is the guy going to shoot him? And, and gave kind of a defense of how many cops feel in that moment of terror, trauma.
Yeah.
But this is the one case that, to me, I don't have black children, but if you watch the video and just Google Terrence Crutcher, the man was on a highway.
Right.
He had two hands in the air. There were 1, 2, 3, 4 police officers.
Yeah.
Pointed guns at him.
It was escalated to begin with.
There was a helicopter.
Yeah.
His hands were in the air, and apparently he wasn't following instructions exactly. And he walked toward his car and put his hands on top of the car, and one of the officers thought he might reach into his car and pull out a gun. Uh-huh. Now look, I'm like 5'11" and weigh about 180 pounds, but these cops were about 6 feet away from the dude. And if I would have been one of the cops, I would have just ran toward the dude and grabbed him and withheld him.
Right.
There were 4 cops. Mm-hmm. So had all 4 cops pulled out their tasers and tasered him and tackled him, but they shot the guy in the back like he was a pig. Right. And I just don't care what the jury decided. This is wrong. Mm-hmm. And, I'm a white guy, but if I was a black guy, I would be pissed off tonight. And I would be livid, and I might be out on the street throwing things at windows. Because there are gray areas, but this is one case, and go Google it. Mm-hmm. This dude should not, father of 4 kids, enrolled in college. There's a problem in our country. There is,
and we keep seeing this happening. And, it's like, I have so much empathy for cops. My sister was a cop for many years, and I know that, there's an inherent risk that goes into that job. But if you cannot handle that risk, if you are so scared of people that you have to shoot them in that situation, you probably shouldn't be a cop.
Yeah.
You probably shouldn't be a cop. And I have so much sympathy for the risk that goes into it, but citizens should not be shot. Unarmed citizens should not be shot, and black men disproportionately should not be shot. And then we have to start looking at racial bias. And would this have happened to me on the side of the road, which I feel convinced it wouldn't have.
No, I wouldn't have been shot.
No.
They would have, stopped, tackled me, tasered me, whatever. And
so, and the woman who shot him released a statement today, and it was so unempathetic, and it was just a gross statement of like, well, I'm sorry that he made choices that led to his death, basically. But, nobody should be shot for a mistake.
And I think in our podcasts, I think what we really want to aim for, or what I want to aim for, I haven't run this by you, is just the realization that there is implicit bias in all of us.
Yeah.
In me.
All of us.
I go to the beach sometimes, down here in Newport Beach, and sometimes I'll be sitting there in my little world of quiet, and some minorities will pull up next to me and they'll put up their tent and they'll have their styrofoam coolers, and I have to say there's bias in me, and it's not pretty. There's just a sense of, wait, what are you guys doing here? Like, where did you drive in from? And I only say that to say that I think to the degree that we could all realize that we have this implicit bias against others, whether it be black, Mexican, Muslims, and we somehow think that America is supposed to be this white, homogenized place, which it isn't, and it ain't going there, and people that look white like us are going to be the minorities in 2042. We all have to acknowledge that thing exists. It exists in me, and it's shameful to admit it, but
it exists in everyone, and the thing is, it exists even in minorities. We have all been socialized in this country to make assumptions about minorities. Every one of us, we're swimming in it. And the thing is, it's like, at the end of the day, police forces need to be trained in racial bias, and they need to be trained when they're dealing with a minority, specifically a black person, because of the racial bias, because of the mistrust from the black community, because this shit keeps happening. They need to be trained to de-escalate rather than escalate when dealing with black people. And what continues to happen, and we see it over and over, and especially in this case, it's escalated. It's escalated, and tensions rise, and black people, the black community is mistrustful of police, and rightly so. And that's been a reality that was a learning curve for me. I have a friend who about 10 years ago, there was a situation where there was a black man on the run from police, and I'm like, why doesn't he just give himself over? And she's like, you do not understand what it's like. Like, you don't get it. You don't get that I was raised watching Watts and Rodney King and all of this stuff. We don't see we don't see police officers as inherently good. And so there are tensions that are high for black people because of the mistrust, and then also for the police because of the inherent bias that we've been socialized with. So de-escalation in those situations is critical, and police are not being trained in that at all.
Totally. Someone had a great question, Christine, I think, she says, why do you think there is such ample reluctance to admit personal bias?
Because it's ugly and it's unflattering, and white people don't want to look at it. They don't want to look at it. We want to think that we are beyond racism. We want to think that that's a thing that only bad people do, that evil people do. And nobody wants to admit that everyone's happy talking about racists, right? So we're happy talking about the KKK or the bad racist people.
Hitler.
Right. But nobody wants to talk about systemic racism, because that implicates all of us a bit. And I think that is just, it's really hard for people to admit their own implicit racism, that there might be some kernel of that lives in them. Based on what they grew up with, and even based on media representations of black people. And, a lack of exposure is a huge thing too.
And just the whole sin, I think, of in-groups and out-groups.
Yes, very
and
much
that goes back to the beginning of time. I mean, Jesus was hanging around, and if you were in the in-group, you were Jewish, you were a Pharisee, you kind of didn't do crap on the Sabbath. Right? You gave 10% of all your spice, and there was a certain kind of way to measure that you were on the in-group. And today in America, to be on the in-group, essentially, I think, means to be somewhat wealthy, somewhat educated, definitely lighter color skin, in many circles to be Republican. But the idea of the diversity that our country is moving into, both in terms of race, color of people's skin, religion, that's why Muslims are having so much trouble right now. We have this idea of what's in. And it happens in third grade, and it happens in your sophomore year in college, and it unfortunately happens in situations where some black guy is gunned down like an animal in the middle of a highway with his hands in the air with 4 cops and a helicopter.
Right. Yeah, it's really sad. It's really sad, and I think... I don't think anything's going to change until people start really admitting this whole idea of systemic racism. And I will say this, I was talking earlier about, I don't understand why Republicans aren't outraged at Trump. and that I think that belies this sort of blind allegiance. I don't understand why more cops are not speaking out against this. Aside from my sister, who is also raising black children, I don't think I've seen a cop speak up. And I think that's problematic. I don't know if that's some like kind of cop code, but cops need to start questioning this. And police officers within themselves, within their group, need to start policing each other for this kind of systemic racism. And it feels like, again, there's this whole kind of like cover up. And then you've got Pence, who, politically is sort of, brotherhood. It's a brotherhood. And you've got Pence who's sort of going like, oh, we cheer for you too. But I feel like cops, police officers, who I am so appreciative of, but I think they need to start speaking up. If they don't think this is acceptable, if they don't want to be seen as racist, as unsafe, this is bad press. So start talking, right? Why aren't they talking?
And maybe our next podcast should be about privilege, because I think, when you grow up with a single mom who's working 3 jobs in some little apartment that you share in the Bronx, the cards are stacked against you.
Yeah.
And I think many cops, I hate to say it, and they're wonderful cops, amazing cops. I know some of them. But there is this kind of, and I think it's more dominant in the Republican Party, but this idea that suck it up, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, suck it up. We all have free will. My dad did it. But I think until you grow up in the ghetto, in those situations of poverty, I think of the movie with Will Smith, Pursuit of Happiness, and just how hard it is to get out of that.
Right.
We have to have empathy. And 90% of our prisons are filled with people who grew up in these homes where they were neglected and abused. They grew up in the wrong neighborhoods. And I think, to my party, I think we fail utterly in having compassion and empathy for those people.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, I think that ends our discussion for today. Gosh, we covered a lot though.
We did. I wonder how long it was.
I don't know yet. All right, you guys, thank you for joining us. So stay tuned. We are, like I said, hopefully going to be pushing this out to a podcast soon. So if that is your preferred method of listening, we would love to have you join us there. And hit us up in the comments for any comments you have, but also any ideas you have for our podcast, any things you want to hear us talk about, any name ideas you have, any feedback you can give us, we really appreciate.
See ya.
Thanks, guys.